This is a demonstration of the new 5e plugin. The 5e plugin aims to replace the 5e Ruleset plugin with a more versatile system. The 5e plugin is based on the concept of modifiers and formula. This allows the plugin to be expanded with whatever modifiers you want, purely by configuration, and you don't need to modify the plugin every time you want to add a new bonus for the shield spell or bless spell or something else. So when we configure characters for this plugin, we will associate formulas with each of the checks, whether it be a skill check, an attack check, save check, or whatever. It's going to have a formula. The formula can be a set value, so something like AC might have a set value, or it can be a calculation of various things, such as an attack. So here we have an example of a stealth check. So a stealth check is a D20. It adds the dex modifier. It adds your proficiency bonus. In this particular case, I decided to configure it with a optional guidance. And then I also decided to configure it with a optional skill bonus, so that, if I need to add in a extra die for something or an extra modifier for something, I've got that option. Now, again, this formula is purely configuration. So if I am never going to use a extra skill bonus, I don't need it there. If I'm not going to use guidance, I don't need to configure it. That was completely up to me. Similarly, if I came up with some additional modifier that I wanted to add there, number of pickles in a jar, I don't know. I could very easily do that purely by configuration. No need to modify the plugin. So when we create a character sheet, we can define which values are hard set values. They're not going to change while you're playing, or at least not within the session. So something, for example, like dex. Dex probably for the session isn't going to change unless you're leveling up in the middle of the session. So it's configured not to be exposed. Something like guidance, well, I want to be able to turn guidance on and off. So in the character sheet, we configure this to be exposed, and then I can edit that during gameplay. I can demonstrate that. If I click here, I can either go by radial menu or by keyboard. I can go by radial menu and go edit. And here we can see all of the stuff that I've set up in my character that I want shown here for me to be able to edit. So for example, for the shield spell, bless spell, and guidance cantrip, I've just got toggles, so I can very easily turn them on and off. Hex, I've got a toggle for that. Then I decided to add in a generic attack bonus and a skill bonus. So if I ever need to modify a roll, I can just do that right here. I've got here roll with advantage or disadvantage. And you can also use this to track various things. So something like the number of wild shapes left. It's not unlikely to be used in a formula, but you can use this to track it. So you don't need a secondary plugin like the custom stats plugin, for example. You can just do that as part of your plugin here. So this is the core philosophy behind the plugin. You basically have a bunch of different, we call it placeholders, that you can set up, and then you can use them in your formulas for skill checks, saves, whatever, and that's the basis. So again, all of these are defined by the character configuration, not hard-coded. So if I want to add or take them away, no problem. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the things that this plugin will do for you. So first thing, if I right-click and I check the actions, this character happens to have save, skills, spells, and melee. Let's start with skills. So there's two types of skills. There are regular skill checks and opposed skill checks. So if I go and hit something like survival, we can see that it rolled survival. This format here for the output is totally configurable. You can configure what the GM gets. You can configure what the person who's initiating the action gets. You can configure what the target of the action, if it's an opposed action, gets. And you can configure the message that anybody else who's none of those three categories gets. So totally configurable. The messages all have, again, placeholders for all this kind of information. So very flexible. So you can show as little or as much as you want. Okay. So in this particular case, we can see this was our roll formula for survival. It's a D20 roll, plus wisdom, plus proficiency bonus for this character, with an optional guidance and optional skill bonus. So you can see that that resolves down to a D20 plus 3 plus 2. Guidance is currently turned off, so it's a 0. And I've got no skill bonus, so that's also 0. And then it does the actual roll and gets the total. At the moment, this plugin is using randomly generated rolls only. Eventually, I'll be working it to work with the Talespire die, but at the moment, it's just random rolls. Okay, so that's a simple skill check. Now I can show you here how that guidance works. So again, if I wanted to roll with guidance, I can just, again, open up the menu, either through the radio menu or through the keyboard. I can just hit guidance here, close that up. And now if I make that same roll, you can see that this time guidance got replaced. Instead of a 0, we have it a D4, and it happened to have rolled a D4 for us. Nice, giving us a total of 19. So very easy for me to create a toggle that turns the effect of guidance on and off. And again, the plugin has nothing to do with that. This is purely configuration. The plugin supports you adding your own, but it has no concept of guidance. That's purely character sheet configuration. Bless works the same way, except that Bless is added to attacks. So, simple check. Then we also have under skills, we have opposed checks. So if I click on my character, right click on the goblin, and select something like stealth. Right now, I've got it configured so that it doesn't show any messages when it initiates the action. It gives everything at the end. But again, that's purely configurable. If you would like, your action to generate a message here that you're initiating the action and then a second message for resolving it, you can absolutely do that. Now, at this point, this character happens to have his reaction turned on. So what that does is when I'm doing something against that character, it stops the processing and it waits until that character, in this case the goblin, says that he is done taking his reaction. Typically, you would use that for player character, not for monsters. But in order to demonstrate this, I've set this up on the monster. So you can see down here, there is a button for reaction complete. So at this point, for example, if this was an attack, the goblin could use a shield spell or something like that. In this particular case, it's a survival check. There's nothing that he can really do to affect that. So he's just going to say reaction complete. And then our processing goes through. And again, this message is completely configurable. Because right now I'm running as a GM, I'm getting the message with everything in it. That's how I configured it. I configured it for the GM getting all the information, and then the person initiating the action gets his portion of the information or hers, and the target gets his his or her portion, and so on. But again, that's all configurable. So we can see here that, again, the roll formula, we can see what was rolled. We can see that the opposing person was the goblin. We can see here that the stealth skill was opposed by perception. And then the roll for the perception. And because that roll was less than what I rolled, the stealth was successful. It is important to note that the plugin does support opposed by multiple skills. So for example, if you're doing a grapple, which can be opposed by either athletics or acrobatics, this fully supports it, and it will pick the better skill. Now, what is also important to note here is, unlike the 5e Ruleset plugin, where you had to have the character sheets for anything you're going to meet on each player's machine, the new 5e plugin does not need that. It uses a distributed system. So if I am playing Minx here, I need to have Minx's character sheet, which makes sense. I'm playing Minx, so I'm going to have her character sheet. But this goblin, for example, I don't need to have that goblin's character sheet at all. As long as somebody has it, typically that would be the GM, but as long as somebody has it, I don't need it. What happens in this exchange is Minx's roll is made, which gets us down to, in this case, a 10. And then the system basically looks up the opposed skill, which is perception, and sends out to all the players asking, does anybody know what the perception of a goblin is? And, well, most of the players probably will not have the goblin character sheet, so they will stay silent, but the GM's computer or plugin will say, hey, I do have the information for a goblin, and it will send that back to, in this case, my computer, because that's who initiated it, and the check gets resolved. So that way, only the players really only need to have their own character sheets, and then the GM has the rest. So that means if the GM adds more monsters, it's not a problem. The GM does not need to send those monsters to the players. All he has to do is add them to his computer, and this plugin will handle it. So that's a big plus of this plugin, is that the GM no longer needs to make packs of all of the character sheets and keep updating them, sending them to the players to update their copy, because this is a distributed system. Okay, so that was skill checks. We can do, normally you don't really need to roll saves, because whatever attack is going against you will roll that save for you, but that option is still there, so I can go and actually do a charisma check save, and it will resolve that for me. Same thing, we've got basically the formula gets resolved, and a total. And again, this what's written out here, totally configurable. Then we can do spell skills. We did that. Okay, so now we can get into spells. So I'm going to, hold on. So if I go over here and I am going to do, no, so like that, I'm going to attack this goblin here with a spell. So the layout of the radial menu here is also totally configurable. So if, I've decided here to lay out my spells based on level, but if you like to lay them out based on the damage type or something like that, totally configurable. You can configure that on your end to put whatever you like anywhere else, anywhere in that menu, and it won't affect anything. Anybody else that is trying to get information from you when they're attacking you or something like that, or doing a post check against you, we'll be able to find that information. So yeah. So here, if I go cantrip and I'm going to like Eldritch Blast him, for example. So again, here, as we just said earlier, the Goblin's reaction is turned on, so we're getting this reaction option. I'm going to actually turn that off so we don't stop there every time. And I'm going to complete that. Okay, so in this particular case, I've set up the Eldritch Blast to automatically roll my damage, and I've also asked it to automatically roll Hex. Right now, I've got the Hex on a toggle, so we can see up here, it's on a toggle. The way I happen to have configured it in the character sheet means that the Hex entry will always appear, but if it's not used, it's just going to be zeroed out, as we can see here. But if it is being used, it's going to have values. I could have configured the Hex damage to be as part of the Eldritch Blast, in which case then if it was nulled out, we wouldn't get a whole second message here. Again, this is all coming back to the fact that all of this, the messages, all of the responses, it's all coming from the configuration of the character. So the the plugin is the framework, but all of the real logic is completely configured in the character sheet, making this a very versatile plugin. So we can see here, we did our Eldritch Blast. It rolls the damage only if you hit. Makes sense. We can see that for Eldritch Blast, it was the target was the Goblin, opposed by AC, so it figured out the the Goblin's AC here. It was a hit. We did some force damage. In this particular case, not a normal Goblin. It's a very special Goblin that is resistant to force. So you can see here, it said that I did 14 points of damage to the Goblin because I happen to be have Agonizing Blast, and I seem to have rolled maximum here. But it resisted that force damage and took it down to 7. So we can see here, and it took that off the Goblin's life. Yes, for testing purposes, the Goblin has a very large amount of life, and as a kind of a bonus, it gives you a little bit of a status here, because like here for the GM, we've got the actual hit points that the character has left, but likely for the other players involved, you wouldn't have that information. So the title gives them a little bit of a clue. Basically, if they're unhurt, it will say unhurt. If they've got 75% or more hit points, it's going to say scratched. Over 50 is wounded. Over 25 is bloodied. Over 0 is critical, and 0 is dying. So this will give your characters a little bit of an idea of how far they've taken down the enemy without actually having to show them the hit points, which you typically would not do. But again, as I said always, all these messages are totally configurable. Yeah, so here we got the damage rolled, and again, because I set this up for rolling both Eldritch Blast and Hex, I got the Hex here, but I didn't cast my Hex, so it came out with a 0. So if I go over here, cast my Hex spell, and you know what? Let's say for some great wonderful reason, I'm rolling with advantage. No problem. And let's make that attack again. So we can see that because I turned the reaction off for the goblin, it didn't stop now. It just went straight through. We can see that we hit. We rolled a 5 and a 10 for our roll with advantage. So that gave us a 16. The armor class of the goblin is only 14, so that hit. There's our Eldritch Blast damage. 5. Goblin has resistance, so that took it down to 2. And then you can see that now because I turned Hex on, Hex actually did have a value, 2, because Hex might not be forced. Hex might be necrotic. Anyways, in this particular case, the Hex damage was set to force, so he was also resistant to that. Probably should have been necrotic. So yeah, that is a attack. The melee attacks is basically the exact same thing. It's just going to be described as being a sword attack or staff attack here, but oh, whoops. Yeah, so exact same thing. Damage is bludgeoning this time, so no resistance. And I don't think I added Hex to this one. Yeah, so all of that resolves here and is all configurable. I think that is mostly it. There is still, if you look under the spells, you do have the option to also have an entry for the damage itself, so that if you ever want to roll the damage without doing an attack, in some cases, like if you have ongoing damage, you can do that. So you can roll that. I will actually demonstrate that. So if I go to spells, cantrip, Eldritch Blast damage, you can see it just goes straight to doing the damage. So same thing. For example, if you didn't want to have a toggle for your Hex, you could always just roll your Hex damage that way. There's, again, this plugin, versatility is the key factor here. So you can configure it whichever way you want. So that is, I think that was it here. Saves melee, spells, skills. You can have spells that just simply say you're like they don't actually do anything. So something like mending. There is no game mechanics or like nothing here in the 5e plugin happens when you use mending, but it will just make a entry here that you use mending. So if you want to kind of record what spells you used, you can absolutely do that.